This next section is going to look at capitalism and labor and its connection to South Africa. The purpose of apartheid laws was to ensure that there was cheap black labor for whites, men in labor, that is to say in factories and mines, and women as maids, etc. So we must remember that the National Party, the NP, stated that the goals of apartheid was, one, to institutionalize racism, but also to achieve, quote, the reallocation of labor between mining, manufacturing, and agriculture, end quote. That's to say, the goal here by apartheid was for the government to control, manipulate, change where black people were working. And we can see this in the political cartoon here at left of work for whites in white spaces, but then in paired with the homeland policy that we looked at in the prior lecture, that these urban spaces built by blacks would remain white spaces. This was done, of course, through passbooks or reference books, which were a system through the formalization in those papers of labor that it assured the owners of gold and diamond mines that they were able to get a steady stream of cheap, compliant labor. So the passbook reference book system served many purposes in terms of the expansion of white wealth in South Africa. To that end, let's look at bus boycotts. Bus boycotts were a major form of protest even before the NP's election in 1948. These go back decades before, and there were also a number of different bus boycotts during the time we're looking at in the 1950s. Like the United States, non-whites in South Africa were dependent on buses. This is due to the tremendous amount of capital that you would need to own a car that most blacks didn't have. So you have a case where, one, people don't own cars, and then two, because of the homeland system, blacks are living far away from city centers. They're residing in townships. They've been removed from so-called black spots. Their neighborhoods have been destroyed, and they're living far away from the cities. But they're still working in the cities, as you can see in this political cartoon. So how do you get from where you work to where you live and back? Well, you're dependent on the buses. And the bus boycotts really are significant because they show a sign of the effects of the extremely low wages paid to Africans and high unemployment in the townships where they're forced to live. So they're forced to live in these townships where there are very few jobs, certainly not the quality of pay that you can get in white spaces. And this is also a sign of the economic effects of political actions, like apartheid laws. So these apartheid laws have economic effects. The most famous bus boycott was the 1957 Alexandra bus boycott. Alexandra is just outside of Johannesburg. Let's pause for a quick second and unpack this image. Take a moment, just look at the image. What do you see? You may notice that here is the Public Transportation Corporation, PUTCO, as it was abbreviated. And PUTCO's bus here, it looks empty, or nearly so. And then on the roadways, you have people on bicycle and lots of people walking. 1957, you may remember from earlier, is just 2 years after the Montgomery bus boycott of Rosa Parks and Dr. King in the United States. So this massive boycott in Alexandria was sparked by a planned increase in bus fare. In fact, it was just a 1 cent increase, which sounds outrageous. Why boycott over a 1 cent raise, but the existing wage before was 4 cents. And so a 1 cent raise is a huge, huge increase. And in fact, before the raise in bus fare was equivalent to 1 month's salary. That is to say, people were making 4 cents a month. 70,000 people walked daily for 12 weeks, and some for up to 20 miles. The boycott here, like in Montgomery, Alabama, was well followed by the black residents of Alexandria. And this is noteworthy because it generated sudden and unexpected support from the white community. You had newspapers in the white community supporting him. You had situations where there were whites, especially white women, who would offer car rides and free car rides to black residents to get them to work. In some cases, people would send a car to get their maid picked up from Alexandria to work in the nice white areas of Johannesburg. And this isn't just left-wingers and commies. This is quote-unquote regular people. The government responded by backing down and did not raise the bus fare. It was really a very rare victory for public protest and boycott during the apartheid era. The apartheid era doesn't have many cases like the Montgomery bus boycott, where you have mass protest and it being met with compliance, I guess, by the government. Typically, what you would see more is a crackdown. So, some significance here is this was seen by the government as a greater threat because it wasn't organized by the ANC. This was spontaneous. A lot of these boycotts in the 20s through 50s were spontaneous in the sense that they weren't organized by one leader or one organization. And this was evidence that, from the ANC's perspective, that people were willing to take some action. And it led to what was seen as an opportunity that showed that the government had little effective response to a generally popular demonstration. Boy, if we work together, the government doesn't have much of a response. So let's work together, and who knows what's possible if the ANC can channel this public energy, public anger. The challenge, though, is could the ANC, this formerly elitist organization, actually control and direct genuine mass movement by the poor? And what are some of the risks of stirring people up? Can you control a movement that's been stirred up? That brings us into our next and last segment, that will look at the creation of the Pan-Africanist Congress.